My sister mocked me at the wedding I paid for, until the groom's boss took the mic. The chandeliers above shimmered like frozen stars, scattering light across the reception hall I had secretly paid for. My sister, Isabel, stood radiant at the microphone, the center of her perfect universe. "I want to give a huge thank you to my sister Sophia," she began, her voice dripping sugar as her eyes found mine, "for finally contributing to something meaningful." Polite chuckles rippled through the guests. I mean, with no husband or kids, just her little office job. It's a good thing she could help. We wouldn't have this wedding without her. The room erupted in laughter. 300 faces turned to stare, their eyes filled with pity and amusement. My stomach turned to ice, but I held my head high and smiled. They were laughing at the quiet, pathetic victim she had painted. They had no idea they were mocking their benefactor, the most powerful woman in the room. My name is Sophia, and I'm 31 years old. I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who fixes things and then fades into the background. But that night, under the weight of my sister's casual cruelty, something inside me finally broke. That night was the end of the old Sophia. And before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. To understand that night, you have to understand the ecosystem of my family. We weren't just a family, we were a solar system, and Isabel was the sun. Everyone and everything orbited her. Her moods dictated the emotional temperature of our home. Her successes were celebrated with trumpets, and her failures were treated as romantic tragedies. From the very beginning, she glowed, and I learned to work in the shadows she cast. I remember it as early as second grade. The school play was The Wizard of Oz. Isabel, with her bright blonde hair and natural dramatic flair, was the obvious choice for Dorothy. She didn't even have to audition, really. The teacher just looked at her and said, "Of course." I, on the other hand, was cast as a munchkin, a role that required blending into a crowd. The real work I did, however, was backstage. 2 days before the show, Isabel threw a tantrum because her Dorothy dress wasn't sparkly enough. My mother, instead of telling her to be grateful, went out and bought glitter and a glue gun. I was the one who spent 6 hours painstakingly applying each tiny speck of glitter to the gingham fabric until my fingers were raw and cramped because Mom said I had the steadiest hands. On the night of the play, right before the curtain went up, the zipper on Isabel's dress snagged and broke. Panic erupted. My mother was frantic. The teacher was wringing her hands. But I, quiet 7-year-old Sophia, grabbed the emergency sewing kit from backstage. With shaking hands, I sewed my sister directly into her costume, my small stitches neat and strong. She stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. I watched from the wings, a needle prick of blood on my thumb, and no one even looked my way. After the show, my parents scooped Isabel into their arms, telling her she was a star. They didn't notice the glitter on my jeans or the exhaustion on my face. My contribution was invisible, functional. It was simply expected. This pattern became the blueprint for our lives. As we grew older, the stakes got higher, but the roles remained the same. When I was 16, the factory where my dad had worked for 20 years shut down. The layoff hit him like a physical blow. He'd sit at the kitchen table for hours, staring at stacks of bills, his face gray with worry. My mother would flutter around him, making tea and offering anxious platitudes. Isabel, who was 18, and in her senior year of high school, was completely oblivious. Her life continued unabated, parties, football games, shopping for prom dresses. One night, I found my dad with his head in his hands, the threat of foreclosure a palpable fear in the room. I sat down with him. I didn't know much, but I knew basic math. We spent the next 3 hours going through every single bill, every expenditure, creating a brutal but necessary budget. I pointed out subscriptions that could be canceled, called the cable company to negotiate a lower rate, and figured out a payment plan for the electricity bill. I felt ancient, a child playing the role of an adult. Just as we were finishing, the front door burst open and Isabel danced in, smelling of perfume and hairspray, her laughter echoing in the tense silence. "Oh my God, you guys, you will not believe what happened at the party," she began, before stopping short. "Geez, why is everyone so gloomy? You're bringing me down." My dad just sighed, but my mom managed a weak smile. "It's nothing, honey. Tell us about your night." And just like that, the crisis was swept under the rug for her. Her brightness was too precious to be dimmed by our reality. My practicality was essential, but her happiness was sacred. Her life was a series of these deflections, a carousel of second chances paid for by my first and only chances. She enrolled in a prestigious art school, only to drop out after a semester. Because the professors were stifling her creativity, the non-refundable tuition vanished into thin air. My parents took out a small loan to cover the loss. Meanwhile, I chose a state school close to home, securing a partial academic scholarship and working 30 hours a week at a campus coffee shop to cover the rest. I remember the day I had to give up my spot on a study abroad program in Spain. It was my one big dream, a chance to see the world beyond our small town. But that same month, my mother slipped on some ice and broke her hip. She needed surgery and weeks of at-home care. My dad couldn't take that much time off work. Isabel was living in a different city, pursuing a fleeting dream of becoming a poet, a dream funded by monthly checks from my parents. When she heard about Mom's accident, she sent a huge, expensive bouquet of lilies to the hospital and called to say how devastated she was that she couldn't be there. Everyone praised her for being so caring. No one seemed to notice that I was the one who withdrew from my favorite class, who learned how to change Mom's surgical dressings, who half carried her to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and who fell asleep with my face pressed into a textbook at 2 a.m. So, when Isabel announced her engagement to Daniel, it was the logical conclusion to her life story. He was handsome, successful, and came from a family that had a name in their community. He was her prize for being herself. At their engagement party, a lavish affair at his parents' country club, my father raised a glass. "To Isabel and Daniel," he'd boomed, his voice thick with emotion. "A couple who will finally make this family proud." I stood in the back of the room, holding a tray of champagne glasses for the caterer because they were short-staffed, and I felt that familiar, dull ache. I had graduated with honors. I had a stable career. I had been paying my own bills since I was 18, and had started helping with theirs. Had none of that registered as a source of pride? The calls about the wedding started on a Tuesday night. I had just gotten home after a 14-hour workday, my mind a tangled mess of spreadsheets and client reports. Isabel's voice was a practiced symphony of sweetness and vulnerability. "Soph," she'd purred, "you've always been the stable one, the smart one with money." It was the same prologue she used for every request. She told me about the venue, the dress, the flowers, her voice painting a picture of a fairy tale. Then came the hook. "It's just a little help, Soph. Daniel's bonus is coming, but we need to secure the dates now. You'll make it right, won't you? Like you always do." I closed my eyes, the exhaustion pressing down on me like a physical weight. Every rational part of my brain screamed, "No, this is not your problem. This is insane." But 30 years of conditioning is a powerful force. It's a current that's nearly impossible to swim against. The responsible one doesn't say no. The worker bee doesn't abandon the hive. With a sigh that felt like it came from the deepest part of my soul, I said, "Okay, Izzy, send me the details." The first transaction was the one that truly broke the seal. $24,000 for the venue deposit. The number felt obscene on my laptop screen. It was more than I had paid for my car. It was the lion's share of the down payment. I had been meticulously saving for a small condo, a space that would be mine and mine alone. For years I had dreamed of it, painting the walls whatever color I wanted, having a small garden, not having to hear my upstairs neighbors' arguments. As I navigated to my bank's wire transfer page, my hand trembled over the mouse. This wasn't just money. It was a dream being liquidated for someone else's party. I felt a wave of nausea. I almost closed the laptop. I could say no. I could call her back and tell her it was impossible. But then I pictured the fallout. Isabel's tears, my mother's disappointed sighs, my father's lecture on the importance of family, the accusations of being selfish, of being jealous. The emotional cost of saying no felt, in that moment, even higher than the financial one. So with a deep, shuddering breath, I typed in the account number for the Grand Estate at Willow Creek and clicked confirm. The screen refreshed, and the number in my savings account plummeted. A piece of my future had just been vaporized. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a text from Isabel. It was a string of champagne bottle and heart emojis. "You're a lifesaver! Can't wait to celebrate with you. We'll pay you back the second Daniel's bonus hits, I promise." I stared at the word promise, a word that had become utterly meaningless from her lips. It was a ghost of a commitment, and we both knew it. That transfer opened the floodgates. The wedding became my second job, a demanding, unpaid internship in my own humiliation. 2 weeks later, Isabel called me in a panic from a catering tasting. "Soph, you have to help. They have a raw bar with oysters and lobster tails, and it's to die for. but it's an extra $12,000. And Daniel's parents are being so cheap about the budget. I was eating a bowl of instant ramen at my desk, trying to make a project deadline. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical. My life was ramen and spreadsheets. Hers was lobster tails and champagne wishes. I closed my eyes, pictured my shrinking savings account, and gave her my credit card number over the phone. I could hear the caterer in the background saying, "Excellent choice." The most painful day was the day we went shopping for her wedding dress. It was just me, Isabel, and our mother. We went to a chic, minimalist boutique where the dresses were displayed like works of art. The saleswoman, a woman with an unnervingly perfect French twist, immediately began fawning over Isabel. My mother was in her element, sighing with joy every time Isabel emerged from the dressing room in another cloud of white tulle and lace. I was just there. I was the wallet. They never asked my opinion. When I tentatively suggested that a simpler, less expensive A-line dress was very flattering, my mother gave me a look of pity. "Oh, Sophia, that's a sweet little dress, but this is Isabel's day. It needs to be a statement." Isabel settled on a French designer gown that cost $11,000. As she stood on the pedestal, admiring her reflection from every angle, the saleswoman turned to me for the first time. "And how will you be paying for this today?" she asked, her tone clinical. Not, "How will we be paying," but "How will you?" The assumption was already made. I was the sensible background sister. Of course I was the one handling the transaction. I pulled out my credit card, my hand feeling strangely disconnected from my body. As the machine processed the payment, my mother squeezed my arm. "You're such a good sister," she whispered, her eyes misty as she gazed at Isabel. She'll never forget this, but I knew she would. Or rather, she would remember the dress, the feeling of wearing it, but the memory of how it was acquired would be conveniently erased. I tried once to gently apply the brakes. I invited my parents over for dinner, making them their favorite lasagna. After we ate, I laid out a simple spreadsheet I had made, not with anger, but with concern. It's getting to be a lot," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "We're at $94,000 and we still have the flowers and the band and the rehearsal dinner." My dad put on his reading glasses and peered at the paper. He frowned, not at the total, but at me. "Sophia, this isn't a business transaction. This is your sister's wedding. It's the most important day of her life." "I know," I said, my throat tightening. "But I'm not a bank. I have my own life, my own future to save for." My mother reached over and patted my hand, her touch meant to be comforting but feeling utterly dismissive. "Oh, honey, don't be so dramatic. It's a blessing you're in a position to help. You have that good, stable job and no real expenses to worry about." No real expenses. My rent, my car payment, my student loans, my dream of a home. In her eyes, these were not real. They were trivial compared to the grand, essential expense of Isabel's perfect day. "Your sister will be so happy," she finished, as if that were the only metric that mattered. Isn't that worth it? It wasn't. It wasn't worth the sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling and watching my carefully built financial security crumble. It wasn't worth the feeling of being used, of being an invisible cog in the machine of her happiness. Each payment was a small act of self-erasure. I kept going, telling myself it was the last one, but it never was. There was always one more essential detail, one more once-in-a-lifetime expense. I was paying for every laugh, every toast, every dance. I was funding my own humiliation, one transaction at a time, clinging to the pathetic, childish hope that once the bills were all paid and the party was over, they would finally see me. They would finally say thank you. That hope was the most expensive thing I paid for, and it was the one thing I was about to find out had no value at all. My family's perception of me was frozen in time. They saw me as the 22-year-old who had just graduated from state school and landed a safe, respectable job as an administrator at a logistics company. "Good old Sophia," my dad would say, "always so responsible." They pictured me in a gray cubicle, organizing spreadsheets and answering phones. It was a comfortable, non-threatening image, and it allowed them to maintain the established family hierarchy. Isabel was the dreamer, and I was the drone. The truth was, that version of Sophia hadn't existed for 5 years. The drone had quietly built her own hive. The catalyst for my rebellion was, unsurprisingly, another of Isabel's self-made crises. I was 26 and had been working at the same logistics firm for 4 years. I loved the work, the puzzle of supply chains, the challenge of making complex systems more efficient. I had been praised for my meticulousness, and had been verbally promised a promotion to a junior project manager role. The week the promotion was supposed to be announced, however, the position was given to the vice president's nephew, a recent business school graduate with zero experience. I was told to be a team player and help get him up to speed. I was devastated. It was the first time in my professional life that my hard work had been so blatantly disregarded in favor of someone with better connections. That same afternoon, I got a frantic call from Isabel. She had impulsively quit her job as a receptionist, a job I had helped her get, to join a wellness retreat in Arizona that cost $3,000. She didn't have the money, of course, and her rent was due. She cried, she panicked. She told me I was the only one who could help. I felt a sense of cosmic bitter irony. At the very moment my own career path had been roadblocked, I was being called upon to finance her flight of fancy. I transferred her the rent money, my fingers numb. As I hung up, I looked around my little cubicle, at the motivational posters about teamwork and the photo of my smiling family, and I felt an overwhelming sense of suffocation. I was working within a system, both at work and at home, that would never reward my merit. It would only ever reward the well-connected and the perpetually needy. That night, I went home and didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my cheap kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and sketched out a business plan. I knew the logistics industry was filled with inefficiencies that larger companies were too slow to fix. I saw a niche for a consulting firm that could offer targeted, agile solutions for small to medium-sized businesses. I called it Crosswind Solutions, a name that signified change and movement. For the next 6 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the helpful, overlooked administrator. By night and on weekends, I was an entrepreneur. I drained my small savings to build a professional website. I used my lunch breaks to make cold calls. I spent my evenings studying contract law and accounting. Quitting my job was the single most terrifying leap of faith I have ever taken. I told my family I had taken a new remote position with a different company, a lie they accepted without question because the details of my work had never interested them. The first year was a nightmare of instant coffee, near constant anxiety, and 18-hour days. I almost failed half a dozen times. I remember one particularly bleak winter evening. I was down to my last $200, and a client was refusing to pay an invoice. I sat in my cold apartment, wrapped in a blanket, and cried. I was ready to give up, to crawl back to the safety of a salaried job. Then my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Isabel, sent to the family group chat. She was on vacation in Miami, a trip paid for by her latest boyfriend, posing on a yacht. The caption read, "Living my best life." Seeing her effortless, funded happiness next to my desperate, lonely struggle lit a fire in me. My anger became fuel. I would not fail. I would not go back to being the safety net for her best life. That night, I stayed up and reworked the proposal for a potential client. I landed the contract the next week. It was my turning point. My reputation for being ruthlessly efficient and innovative began to spread. My client list grew. I hired my first employee, a sharp young programmer who helped me develop the proprietary routing software that would become the cornerstone of my business. Within 3 years, Crosswind Solutions was a recognized name in the regional logistics community. The merger came as a shock. A major national transport corporation, Triton Freight, had been watching my company's growth. Their business model was old and clunky, and they were losing clients to more agile competitors like me. Instead of trying to crush me, they made me an offer. They wanted to acquire Crosswind Solutions, absorb my technology and methods, and install me as the president of their new consulting division. The negotiations took 2 months. I sat in boardrooms with men twice my age, men who initially looked at me with skepticism and then with grudging respect, as I calmly and firmly negotiated my terms. When the deal was signed, the number that appeared in my business account was staggering. It was more money than anyone in my family had ever earned in their entire lives combined. I made a conscious, deliberate decision not to tell them. It wasn't about hiding my success. It was about protecting it. I knew with a soul-deep certainty that if they knew about the money, it would cease to be mine. It would become the family money. My success wouldn't be a source of pride. It would be a source of funds. Every one of Isabel's whims, every one of my parents' anxieties would become my financial responsibility. The secret was my shield. It was the only way I could keep what I had fought so hard to build. A few months before the wedding, we landed our biggest client yet, Apex Holdings. It was a massive, multi-year contract to overhaul their entire North American supply chain. I was leading the project myself. I knew from Isabel's incessant bragging that her fiancé Daniel worked at Apex. I looked him up in the company directory out of curiosity. He was a mid-level manager in a completely unrelated department. It was a coincidence, nothing more. But as the wedding approached and the bills mounted, a small, cold thought began to form in the back of my mind. The CEO of Apex, Lawrence Hayes, was a man I had met with several times. He was a guest at the wedding. He knew me as Ms. Carter of Crosswind Solutions. He had no idea I was the quiet, invisible sister Isabel was about to use as a prop in her perfect wedding. It was a secret variable in a very volatile equation, and I had a feeling it was about to change everything. The laughter, when it came, was a physical force. It felt like a wave crashing over me, pinning me to my chair. It wasn't just a few chuckles. It was a full-bodied, unrestrained roar of amusement at my expense. Isabel, my sister, had just delivered the punchline, and I was it. The quiet one, the one with the little office job, the one who had finally contributed to something. She stood there basking in the glow of the spotlight, a triumphant little smirk playing on her lips. She had landed her joke perfectly. My cheeks were on fire. I felt 1,000 pinpricks of heat from my neck to my hairline. I wanted to disappear. I wanted a hole to open up in the polished floor and swallow me whole. Instead, I had to sit there frozen, with 300 pairs of eyes on me. I saw it all. The pity from my older aunts who looked at me with sad, tilted heads as if I were a sick animal. The outright amusement from Daniel's college friends, their faces bright with schadenfreude. The smug satisfaction from Isabel's bridesmaids, who had always treated me with a kind of condescending sweetness. Chloe, the maid of honor, leaned across an empty chair, her breath smelling of champagne. "Oh my God, Sophia, you're such a good sport," she whispered loudly, ensuring our entire table could hear. "That was totally brutal, but it's so classic Izzy, right? You just have to love her. At least you can take a joke." Her words were meant to sound like a compliment, but they felt like another small twist of the knife. I wasn't a good sport. I was a captive audience. And it wasn't a joke. It was a declaration of my worthlessness in her world. I managed a tight, brittle smile. "You get used to it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The flatness of my tone seemed to bore her, and she turned away to giggle with another bridesmaid. A few minutes later, as the waiters began serving the main course, my father made his way over to my table. He was a big man, and he seemed to fill the space beside me, blocking out the rest of the room. He leaned down, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and paternal command. "Just smile through it, honey," he mumbled, his voice low. "Your sister doesn't mean anything by it. You know how she is. She just loves to be the center of attention." He patted my shoulder awkwardly. "Don't make a scene. It's her big day." His words hit me harder than Isabel's. "You know how she is." It was the family motto, the universal excuse for every act of selfishness, every casual cruelty Isabel had ever committed. It was the phrase that had erased my own feelings my entire life. My role was to understand. My role was to absorb. My role was to be the stable, silent ground that she could dance upon. And my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, was here to remind me of that role. He wasn't telling me he was sorry I was hurt. He was telling me to manage my hurt better, to keep it quiet so it wouldn't inconvenience anyone. The rest of the dinner was a blur of exquisite food that tasted like ash in my mouth. A coworker of Daniel's, a slick, self-satisfied man with an expensive watch, came by the table. He had clearly heard Isabel's toast. "You must be Sophia," he said, looking me up and down with an air of clinical assessment. "Isabel told us you've been her rock, helping her and Daniel get started. That's really generous of you." The way he said generous was laced with pity, as if he were talking about a charity case. He saw me exactly as Isabel had painted me, the lonely single woman with a disposable income and an empty life, a resource to be tapped. "It's what family is for," I said, the words automated, meaningless. He nodded, a patronizing smile on his face, before moving on to congratulate Daniel. My mind started to drift back, connecting this public humiliation to 1,000 private ones. I remembered my college graduation. My parents and Isabel had attended. I was graduating summa cum laude, the first in our family to do so. I had a small section about my academic achievements printed in the program, but during the celebration dinner afterward, the entire conversation was about Isabel's upcoming trip to see a music festival in California. My accomplishment was a footnote. Her vacation was the headline. I remembered the time I'd been sick with the flu, so sick I could barely lift my head. Isabel was supposed to bring me soup and medicine after she finished her shopping trip. She never showed up. When I finally managed to call her hours later, she was apologetic but breezy. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Soph. I totally forgot. I ran into an old friend and we just got to talking." She never asked if I was okay. This was the same pattern, just on a much grander stage. My contributions were functional and forgettable. Her desires were vital and urgent. I had just funneled a sum of money equivalent to a junior doctor's annual salary into her party, and my reward was to be the butt of a joke that framed my entire life as a pathetic failure. I risked a look at the head table. Isabel was laughing, her head thrown back, a perfect picture of bridal bliss. She was holding a flute of the vintage champagne I had paid for, wearing the diamond earrings that had been a must-have splurge I had covered. She was so completely, blissfully untroubled. She hadn't just insulted me. She had already forgotten about it. The toast was a momentary bit of theater for her, a way to get a laugh and subtly remind everyone of her own superiority. For me, it was a moment of horrifying clarity. It was in that moment, watching her laugh, that something inside me finally, irrevocably, broke. It wasn't a loud, shattering break, but a quiet, clean snap. The part of me that had always hoped for recognition, for gratitude, for a simple acknowledgement, died. It withered and turned to dust. And in its place, something new and cold and hard began to form. It was resolve. I was not going to cry. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to be the victim in her story any longer. This was her stage, yes. She had set it, lit it, and scripted the first act at my expense. But she had made a critical error. She had underestimated one of the players. She thought I was just a quiet background character. She had no idea I was the producer, and I was about to change the script. The dinner plates were cleared away, and the room settled into the post-meal lull, a gentle hum of conversation and clinking glasses. The MC, a young man with a relentlessly cheerful demeanor, bounced back onto the stage. "All right, folks, I hope you're all feeling as full and happy as I am," he chirped. "It's that time of the evening for a few special words. We're going to kick off our toast with the best man, followed by the maid of honor, and then a very special guest." The best man's speech was a clumsy collection of inside jokes about his and Daniel's college fraternity days, earning polite but unenthusiastic laughter. Then Chloe, the maid of honor, took the microphone, her eyes already brimming with tears. She delivered a saccharine, sentimental speech about her and Isabel's lifelong friendship, filled with platitudes about soulmates and fairy tales. It was all part of the carefully constructed fantasy of the evening. I sat through it all, a silent observer, feeling the strange, icy calm in my veins solidifying. I was no longer a participant in the event. I was a strategist, waiting for the right moment. Finally, the MC returned to the stage. "And now," he announced, his voice taking on a more reverent tone, "we have a very distinguished guest who would like to say a few words. Please join me in welcoming the CEO of Apex Holdings and Daniel's boss, Mr. Lawrence Hayes." A wave of impressed murmurs swept through the hall. This was a clear signal of Daniel's importance, a power move. I watched Daniel preen, subtly straightening his tie and casting a triumphant glance at Isabel. This was the validation he craved. Isabel, for her part, looked like a queen receiving a foreign dignitary, a gracious, benevolent smile fixed on her face. This was the pinnacle of her perfect night, a testament to the incredible world she was marrying into. Mr. Hayes moved to the stage with an air of quiet authority. He was not a flashy man, but his presence commanded the room. He adjusted the microphone and scanned the crowd with intelligent, discerning eyes. "Good evening," he began, his voice a calm, resonant baritone that cut through the low chatter. "Isabel, Daniel, on behalf of everyone at Apex, I want to offer you our warmest congratulations. A wedding is a wonderful celebration of a new partnership, a new beginning." He smiled at them, a polite, professional smile. "Daniel, you've been a dedicated member of our team for several years. Your ambition is notable, and I trust you'll bring that same drive and commitment to your marriage." It was the perfect corporate toast, diplomatic, complimentary, and impersonal. Daniel's chest swelled with pride. He was being praised by the king in front of the entire court. Mr. Hayes took a sip of water, and a respectful silence fell over the room as they waited for him to conclude his pleasantries. But he didn't conclude. Instead, his expression shifted, becoming more serious, more thoughtful. "However," he continued, his voice drawing everyone in, "I feel it would be a significant oversight to not use this opportunity to acknowledge someone else in this room tonight. Someone whose partnership has been, without exaggeration, one of the most impactful and profitable for my company in the last fiscal year." A confused stillness descended. This was not on the script. Guests looked around, their brows furrowed. Daniel's smug expression wavered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He likely thought Mr. Hayes was about to circle back to him with a more elaborate compliment, perhaps even hint at a future promotion. Isabel's perfect smile was frozen on her face, a look of polite confusion in her eyes. Mr. Hayes's gaze swept across the room, methodical and deliberate. He looked past the head table, past my bewildered parents, past the tables of whispering guests. His eyes found me and they stopped. In that moment, the world narrowed to a single point of focus. It was as if a spotlight had been switched on, illuminating my small, insignificant table in a brilliant, terrifying glare. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "Sophia Carter," he said. My name, spoken so clearly and authoritatively, sliced through the silence. He wasn't asking. He was stating, "The founder and owner of Crosswind Solutions, I believe." It took every ounce of my willpower to give a small, almost imperceptible nod. My throat had closed up completely. The reaction was instantaneous and seismic. At the head table, Daniel's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly, pale white. He looked from me to Mr. Hayes and back again, his mind visibly short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile two completely separate realities. Isabel's jaw went slack, her perfect smile crumbling into an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest, while my father just stared, his mouth slightly open, looking utterly lost. The whispers erupted, a cascade of hushed questions. "Crosswind Solutions? What is that? Did he say she owns it?" I saw phones light up under tablecloths as people began frantically Googling my company's name. Mr. Hayes, seemingly oblivious to the chaos he had just unleashed, continued, his focus still entirely on me. "For those of you who are not in the logistics world," he explained to the room at large, "Ms. Carter's company is a powerhouse of innovation. Apex Holdings had been grappling with a deeply inefficient and costly supply chain for the better part of a decade. We spent millions on top-tier consulting firms with negligible results." He paused, letting the weight of that failure sink in. "Ms. Carter and her team at Crosswind came in 6 months ago. Using a proprietary software and a strategic model she developed herself, she has already, in just 2 quarters, streamlined our entire North American distribution network. She has saved my company over $12 million to date." The number hung in the air, glittering and impossible. $12 million. It was a figure so far beyond my family's comprehension that it sounded like a fantasy. Then Mr. Hayes turned his gaze back to the head table, and the look in his eyes was no longer warm or polite. It was cool, sharp, and deeply disappointed. He looked directly at a stunned Daniel. "You're a lucky man, son," he said, his voice laced with an irony so thick it was almost tangible. "And not just because you've married a beautiful and charming woman." He gestured vaguely at Isabel, who looked as if she had been turned to stone. His eyes then locked back onto me, and his expression softened into one of genuine, profound respect. "You are incredibly lucky to be related by marriage to a woman of her caliber and intellect." The final word landed like a judge's gavel. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Every person in that room, from my pitying aunts to Daniel's arrogant friends, was now looking at me not as the pathetic sister, but as a secret power player who had been hiding in plain sight. Isabel's fairy tale had just been interrupted by a reality she never knew existed, and in the wreckage of her perfect night, I felt the first tremor of my own power. The silence that followed Mr. Hayes's toast was not empty. It was filled with the frantic whirring of 300 minds, recalculating, reassessing, and recalibrating everything they thought they knew. In that thick, charged silence, I felt a strange sense of peace descend. The humiliation, the anger, the lifetime of resentment, it all melted away, leaving behind a core of pure, unshakable resolve. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to a situation created by my family. I was at the center of it, and I had a choice. I could shrink back into my chair, let the moment pass, and allow the whispers to become my new narrative. Or I could stand up and claim it. My entire life, I had been told not to make a scene. Don't upset your sister. Don't be dramatic. Keep the peace. That conditioning was a powerful force, and for a terrifying second, it held me paralyzed. I could feel my mother's desperate gaze on me from across the room, a silent plea to just let it go. But then I looked at Isabel. Her face was a canvas of shock and dawning horror. For the first time, she was not in control, and in her loss of control, I found my own. I pushed my chair back from the table. The sound it made, a low, deliberate scrape against the marble floor, seemed to echo like a gunshot in the still room. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. I rose to my feet. My legs felt surprisingly steady. I smoothed the front of my simple $79 dress. a stark contrast to the couture gown I had paid for, and I felt not underdressed, but powerful in my simplicity. I began the long walk toward the stage. Each step was measured, my sensible heels making a soft, rhythmic clicking sound that seemed to mark the seconds of this new reality. The sea of faces parted for me. I saw Daniel's co-workers staring, their mouths agape. I saw my relatives looking at me as if I were a stranger they had just met. I saw my father, his face pale and confused, as if his entire understanding of the world had just been upended. And I saw my mother, her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something I couldn't quite decipher. As I approached the head table, I locked eyes with my sister. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability. She looked at me not with disdain, but with a kind of desperate confusion. "Who are you?" her eyes seemed to ask. And for the first time I had the answer. I reached the stage, and the nervous MC, looking completely out of his depth, offered me the microphone as if it were a venomous snake. I took it. The metal was cool and solid in my hand. I didn't turn to face Mr. Hayes. I didn't turn to face my family. I turned to face the entire room. The entire world that had, just minutes before, laughed at me. I stood in the warm glow of the spotlight, and I did not flinch. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," I began. My voice, amplified by the speakers, was calm and clear. There was no tremor, no hint of tears or anger. It was the voice of a CEO, not a victim. "I deeply appreciate your very kind and public acknowledgement. My team at Crosswind Solutions and I work incredibly hard, and it's always gratifying when that work is recognized." I let the words hang in the air, each one chosen with care. Hard work. Recognized. It was a subtle but direct counterpoint to Isabel's narrative of my little office job. I let my gaze travel over the crowd, meeting the eyes of the people who had pitied me. "Building a business from nothing," I continued, my tone becoming more reflective, "requires a great deal of quiet, unseen sacrifice. There are years of long nights, of missed holidays, of moments of doubt that you have to face alone. It is a path that can be, at times, profoundly lonely." My eyes found my parents. I saw a flicker of pained recognition in my mother's face. So to have the result of that work spoken of here tonight in a room full of people who are important to me, I paused, letting the implication land. "It means more than you could know." I then turned my head slightly, my gaze falling upon Isabel and Daniel. Their faces were frozen, their smiles long gone. "I want to wish the happy couple a lifetime of happiness," I said, my voice softening, but with an edge of steel just beneath the surface. "And I am so glad that this beautiful event," and here I swept my hand out to encompass the glittering, expensive room, "could serve to bring so many important people together." The double meaning was unmistakable. The room was silent, every guest holding their breath. I had not raised my voice. I had not accused. I had not wept. I had simply taken her narrative, turned it inside out, and laid the truth bare for everyone to see. Then, with a final, quiet gesture, I placed the microphone back on its stand. It made a soft, definitive click. It was a mic drop of the quietest, most devastating kind. I turned away from the stage and walked back to my table. The journey back was different. The whispers that followed me were not of pity, but of awe, of shock, of frantic recalculation. A few minutes later, as the shell-shocked band hesitantly started to play a slow song, Mr. Hayes came to my table. He was preparing to leave. He extended his hand to me. "Ms. Carter," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a look of shrewd understanding. "It was a pleasure to see you this evening. You handle yourself with remarkable grace under pressure." He slipped a business card into my hand. "My office will call yours on Monday. I believe the success of our current partnership merits a discussion about a more permanent, strategic alliance." He was offering me a bigger future, right here in the ashes of my sister's perfect night. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," I said, my voice steady. "I look forward to it." He nodded once, a gesture of profound respect, and then he was gone. I sat there, holding his card, the silence at my table a universe away from the silent treatment I was used to. It was the silence of a world that had been irrevocably, fundamentally, and beautifully upended. The power had shifted, not with a bang, but with the quiet, undeniable weight of the truth. The second half of the reception was like a play where all the actors had forgotten their lines. The joyful, celebratory script had been incinerated, leaving only a raw, gaping awkwardness. The band played to an almost empty dance floor. Guests spoke in hushed tones, their conversations punctuated by frequent nervous glances in my direction. The elaborate dessert bar, with its chocolate fountains and towers of macarons, was largely ignored. The appetite for celebration had vanished. I became an unwilling center of gravity. Daniel's co-workers, who had previously looked through me, now circled my table like sharks, their smiles wide and predatory. They wanted to talk about synergistic opportunities, about leveraging assets, about the future of supply chain management. They saw me not as a person, but as a connection, a resource to be exploited. I gave them polite, non-committal answers, my mind already disengaging from the circus my life had become. The most excruciating part was watching my family. They were adrift in a sea of confusion. My father stood by the bar, looking older and smaller than I had ever seen him, nursing a glass of whiskey and avoiding everyone's eyes. My mother was making a valiant effort to pretend everything was normal, flitting between tables with a strained, brittle smile, but her eyes were filled with a panicked bewilderment. And then there were Isabel and Daniel. They went through the motions of being the happy couple, but the illusion was shattered. When it was time to cut the 5-tier cake I had paid for, their hands trembled as they held the knife together. The smiles they plastered on their faces for the camera were grotesque, painful masks. Their first dance was a stiff, joyless affair. They moved together mechanically, their bodies rigid, a universe of unspoken accusations and humiliations separating them. Daniel kept shooting me panicked, venomous looks from across the floor, while Isabel simply stared at a fixed point over his shoulder, her eyes vacant and glassy. Her fairy tale had become a public nightmare. I couldn't bear it any longer. I had done what I needed to do, but I had no interest in lingering to watch the wreckage smolder. While they were occupied with a forced, cheerful farewell to some of Daniel's relatives, I slipped away. I collected my purse and my coat and headed for the grand exit. As I was walking down a quiet, marbled hallway toward the lobby, a voice stammered my name. "Sophia?" It was Daniel. He was standing alone, his bow tie askew, his face pale and sweating under the soft lighting. We need to talk," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, fearful energy. I stopped and looked at him. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a vast, cold emptiness. "No, Daniel," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We don't. But my boss, what he said," he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. "What he said was the truth," I replied. "Perhaps you should try listening to it sometime." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway of the crumbling ruins of his perfect wedding. The blast of cold night air as I stepped outside was a relief. I took a deep, cleansing breath and drove home, the silence in my car feeling like a sanctuary. The phone calls started the next morning, as I knew they would. The first was Isabel, her voice a raw shriek of fury and betrayal. "You ruined my wedding!" she screamed, the sound so distorted with rage it was barely recognizable. "You couldn't just let me have one day. You had to make it about you. You're a selfish, jealous monster." I let her tirade wash over me. The words, which once would have shattered me, now felt like pebbles thrown against a brick wall. "Isabel," I said when she finally paused for breath, my voice preternaturally calm. "I paid over $150,000 for your one day. A day where you publicly mocked my life and my career. All I did was stand up and refuse to be your punchline. That's not jealousy. That's self-respect." "Self-respect? You humiliated me and my husband in front of his boss," she sobbed, her rage collapsing into theatrical tears. "His boss humiliated him," I corrected gently. "He was humiliated because he's married to a woman whose family kept a secret from him, and he works for a man who values competence over connections. None of that is my fault. That is the consequence of the world you built." "I hate you," she whispered, her voice venomous, and then she hung up. I put the phone down and felt a profound sense of release. The hate was finally out in the open, no longer hidden behind a mask of sisterly affection. An hour later, my mother called. Her approach was different, steeped in wounded martyrdom. "Sophia, I don't know what to think," she began, her voice trembling. "Your father and I are just bewildered. Why would you hide such a big part of your life from us? We're your family. Don't you trust us?" The question was so ironic it was almost funny. "Mom," I said, my voice tired but clear. "For the last 5 years, my life has been a series of crises centered around Isabel. When was there time to talk about me? When did you ever ask? Did you ever once wonder how I could afford to bail her out time and time again? Or was it just easier to assume I had a little office job and no life, because that story made my role as the family ATM make sense?" There was a long, wounded silence on the other end. "You're being cruel," she finally whispered. "No, Mom," I said sadly. "I'm being honest. Maybe for the first time ever." That conversation ended with her quiet, heartbroken sobs. Later that afternoon, I got a text from my father. It was clumsy and direct, a perfect reflection of the man himself. Your mother is very upset. Isabel is devastated. You went too far, Sophia. Sometimes, for the sake of family, you need to just swallow your pride. You should call your sister and apologize. I stared at the text for a long time. Swallow your pride. I had been swallowing my pride for 30 years. I had swallowed so much of it that I had almost forgotten who I was. I typed back a single sentence. No. Then I blocked his number, my mother's number, and Isabel's. Not out of spite, but out of a desperate need for peace. The fallout had come and I had survived it. Now the real work of rebuilding had to begin. In the deafening silence that followed, I found myself adrift. The constant hum of my family's needs and dramas had been the background music of my life for so long that its absence was disorienting. I would wake up in the middle of the night with a jolt of anxiety, my hand reaching for my phone, instinctively expecting to see a missed call about a new crisis. But the screen was always dark. The silence was vast and unnerving, and in it, I was forced to finally face myself. One rainy Saturday afternoon, I found myself in my spare room, pulling a dusty old box down from the top of the closet. It was filled with photo albums and old journals, a time capsule of a life I had barely recognized as my own. I sat on the floor, the scent of old paper and fading memories filling the air, and I began to piece together the truth. I opened the first album. There was a photo of me and Isabel at Christmas when I was about 10. Isabel was in the foreground, beaming, holding up a brand new, expensive bicycle. She was the center of the frame, vibrant and joyful. In the background, almost out of focus, was me. I was holding a book, my smile small and hesitant. I remembered that day. I had desperately wanted a chemistry set, but my parents had said it was too expensive and probably dangerous. The book was their compromise. But the bicycle, which cost 4 times as much, had been deemed an essential purchase for Isabel's happiness. Looking at the photo now, I saw not a happy family memory, but a perfect illustration of our family's economic and emotional budget. Isabel's wants were needs, and my needs were negotiable. I flipped through the pages, and the pattern repeated itself in 100 different ways. A photo from a family vacation to the beach. Isabel is posing in a new bikini, while I am in the background, applying sunscreen to a younger cousin because I was the responsible one. A picture from Isabel's high school graduation party. She is surrounded by a laughing crowd, while I am standing by the refreshment table, refilling the punch bowl. I was always there, always essential, but always on the periphery, the stagehand in the grand production of her life. I picked up an old journal from my teenage years, its pages filled with my neat, cramped handwriting. The entries were a heartbreaking litany of my attempts to win my parents' approval. I wrote about the straight A's I got, the academic awards I won, my pride always tinged with a desperate hope. Maybe this will be the thing that makes them see me. But it never was. An entry from when I was 17 stood out. Isabel failed her driving test again. Mom and Dad are so disappointed in her, but they spent all night talking to her, telling her it was okay. I won my regional science fair project today. I put the trophy on the mantelpiece. They haven't mentioned it. Reading those words as a 31-year-old woman, my heart broke for the girl I had been. She was so desperate for a crumb of the attention that was lavished so freely on her sister. She believed that her worth was conditional, something to be earned through relentless achievement and quiet servitude. I saw with horrifying clarity how I had internalized this belief. My drive to build my company wasn't just about ambition. It was a subconscious attempt to finally create something so big, so undeniably successful, that they would have no choice but to see me. I realized my silence over the years hadn't been a noble sacrifice. It had been a form of self-harm. Every time I paid a bill I shouldn't have, every time I swallowed an insult, every time I put my own needs last, I was reinforcing their belief that my needs didn't matter. I was complicit in my own erasure. I had taught them that my boundaries were non-existent. The wedding wasn't their great betrayal. It was simply the logical conclusion of the dynamic I had helped create. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I decided to get help. I found the number for a therapist, my hand shaking as I made the appointment. In my first session, I sat on a comfortable couch, a box of tissues on the table beside me, and I told my story. I told it from the beginning, from the glitter on the Dorothy dress to the toast at the wedding. The therapist, a kind woman with gentle eyes, listened without judgment. When I was finished, she said something that would change my life. "Sophia," she said softly, "it sounds like you have been the designated grown-up in your family since you were a child. That is a heavy burden for a little girl to carry. You don't have to carry it anymore." It was permission. permission to put the burden down, permission to be angry, permission to grieve the childhood I never had, and permission to forgive. Not for them, but for me. She helped me understand that true forgiveness wasn't about excusing their behavior or pretending it didn't happen. It was about accepting the reality of who they were and letting go of the hope that they would ever be different. Forgiveness, she explained, was about reclaiming my own emotional energy, taking it back from the endless, draining project of trying to manage their feelings and win their approval. I left that session feeling lighter than I had in years. The work was just beginning, but for the first time I saw a path forward that wasn't about them. It was about me. I went home and wrote a letter, one I would never send. It was to the little girl in the background of all the photographs, the teenager with the science fair trophy. I see you, I wrote. I see your hard work, your quiet strength, your desperate hope. I'm so sorry no one else did. But I am here now, and I promise from this day forward I will be the grown-up you always needed. I will protect you. I will celebrate you. I will never let anyone make you feel small again. I folded the letter, tucked it into the old journal, and for the first time, I began to heal. 6 months passed. Autumn turned to winter, and the world outside my window became quiet and frosted over. Inside my life, however, things were growing. My conversation with Mr. Hayes led to a new, expanded contract for Crosswind Solutions. We were now managing Apex Holdings' entire international supply chain. The company grew, and so did I. I learned how to be a leader not just in the boardroom, but in my own life. I sold the small house I'd been living in and bought a beautiful home on a lake just outside the city. It had wide windows that let in the morning light and a stone fireplace that crackled on cold nights. The silence here was different. It wasn't the silence of absence or loneliness. It was the silence of peace. It belonged only to me. My relationship with my family settled into a strange, distant quiet. My mother sends polite, infrequent texts, asking how I am, but never asking about my work. My father has never mentioned it. I believe in their minds, they've filed the whole incident under things we don't talk about. As for Isabel, I get an occasional text from her, usually late at night. I miss you, it might say, or I'm sorry. Can we talk? I read the messages. Sometimes I even smile softly. I see the flicker of the old Isabel, the one who knows the right words to say to pull me back into her orbit. But the pull is gone now. I close my phone and go back to my quiet, peaceful life. I have come to understand that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. Peace often looks like a closed door. My closure wasn't a conversation. It was a boundary. If you have ever been mocked, overlooked, or dismissed by the very people you have helped the most, if you have ever been made to feel small so that someone else could feel big, remember this. Your worth is not determined by their inability to see it. Your silence does not have to be surrender. It can be preparation. And when you are finally ready to speak your truth, you won't have to shout. The world will listen. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel.